record his computer. We are supposedly, nope, didn't work. 1 second. No, actually we're on air. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good part of day. Thank you for having me here today with you folks. A special thanks to Sasha for putting this all together and having me as a speaker. The honor is all mine. So I'm gonna skip around a few first few slides that I have, simply because they are sort of, self-explanatory and probably not worth speaking about. So definitely do not need to spend much time discussing my own self. We'll just tell you one little thing that I do almost consider this as an irony, right? I take pride in being around and about the industry where the word agile actually meant something more authentic and more original than it is today. So that was way back when. Of course, I'm not one of the, perhaps maybe people want to mute themselves. I was not in Snowbird, Utah when the manifesto was written, but I can tell you one thing. The word agile wasn't the first word that was meant to be used. The word adaptive was, and some of you may not know the story, but there was some debate between the gentlemen that were in attendance where they went back and forth, and the word adaptive was disqualified for the reason that it would create some anchoring and it would benefit some attendees more than others. So the word agile has become the word of choice. It's a synonymous word, and actually it's a very good litmus test between you and us and I. If you ever want to check whether or not the word agile means something authentic, just see if you can substitute with the word adaptive. If the meaning changes, if you lose it, it most likely whoever used the word agile, they just went off the tracks. If the meaning remains there, adaptive, adaptiveness, adaptability, then most likely whoever used it, they used it correctly. Okay, so just it's a side note. What's next? A little too fast. I'm gonna have my contact info later on, but if you want to take a quick screenshot of this page, please go ahead and do that. If you ever want to reach out to me, if you're not connected with me yet, please do so. I'll be honored to connect with you, and we can exchange. You can ask questions. Now, I was not, I was not the best student when I was back in college, but I think physics was one of my most favorite disciplines. And this person, of course, in my book of record, is one of the most ingenious people. So Albert Einstein, for those of you that maybe are not reading the screen, just listening, he once said that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. What essentially it means, just because we can apply a measurement, a ruler, a measurement tape to something and easily collect this information, does not mean it's useful information. And the opposite is true too. Not every piece of useful information is easy to collect. I'll give you an example. If I get up on the scale every morning, I'm sorry, not on the weight scale, on the height scale every morning, and try to measure my height, unless I start kind of shrinking and inclining and bending forward over time because of my age, eventually will happen to all of us, I shouldn't be expecting much of a difference between Monday to Tuesday or Tuesday to Friday. So I could easily measure this, but it would be almost useless. Now, measuring my weight could be more meaningful. Of course, if I do it every hour, it won't be much of a use unless I lose a lot of water. But if I were to measure this without actually putting any effort into exercising or watching my diet, it would be also useless. So why keep remeasuring something that is pretty constant, or it's trivial. It's trivial. So just because it's easy to measure does not mean we need to go ahead and measure and collect it. Why am I saying this? Why am I starting off with this? Is because many people, and therefore many organizations, have digressed, in my view, into the saga of measuring everything under the sun, everything that moves. And my humble advice is always, just because it's easy to measure, easy to capture does not mean you need it. In fact, you may end up capturing a bunch of stuff that is, to say the least, useless. And if you really want to say the truth, could be even harmful. So just leave it at that. Staying on the course of physics, those of you that remember them from your colleges and universities, please tell me what's the difference between speed and velocity. You can just yell out. I'm not going to score you. I'm not going to give you a grade. I'm not going to revoke your diploma. Just, you know, some of you might have been, could be like physics major or just have good memory.
Velocity carries direction.
Thank you, Chris. And in physics, in the terms of physics, it's called a vector. Vector, so direction. That's precisely right. So speed has a number but no direction, as opposed to velocity that has both. And we might be going super fast on speedometer, but if we're not really measuring our velocity, so if you don't have a right direction, it's just a number. You really have to have a vector, a direction to call something a velocity. So on this note, I'm going to actually make a few statements. Let's take a team, and if it does not have a sprint goal and it's unaware of its strategy, sorry, too fast, and or does not produce a potential shippable product increment at the end of the sprint, if it does not deliver customer-centric features, only component work, only pieces of an application or pieces of infrastructure or pieces of shared services, something that cannot be really put into hands of users and customers. And of course, you can read the rest of the bullets. All of this would be indicative of certainly doing work, but it would be indicative of creating something that may not necessarily be qualified as velocity. Here is why, because we don't know whether or not we're moving in the right direction. We don't know whether or not we are building up towards a larger product increment. So we can be going supersonically fast, like super fast, either in the wrong direction or maybe in the right direction, but so much bypassing and beating to the punch all other venues of work that we might be producing lots of waste. So when we measure something and we try to use this measurement to forecast what we deliver and forecast success of our delivery, we should be very carefully. We should be very careful by not confusing speed and velocity. Okay, so for example, a component team can work supersonically fast, or even automotive assembly line could be working supersonically fast and producing lots of tractor tires, 5,000 tractor tires. Seems like it's a lot, but is this also indicative how fast and how effectively can we deliver tractors to our end customers? If the other assembly line that produces transmissions only delivers maybe 50 transmissions a month. So the bottleneck is 50, not 5,000. So yes, we can produce a huge number, but this number of 5,000 does not really indicate anything useful, or at least very far from being reliable. And I would like to use this slide for to further expand on the same idea. So imagine this. Let me step back for a second. This is an example. This is a slightly loaded graphic from one of the large-scale Scrum books. Some of you might have read it. It shows how 3 component teams, component A, component B, and component C team, respectively, produce in volume various components of the same system. So component A team produces component A, component B team produces component B, and subsequently C produces C. They might be even working from the same container of work, ironically called a product backlog, because this is really not a product backlog. This is some sort of a technical container of tasks, because a product backlog wouldn't have component items. It would have product-centric items. aka features, aka stories, as you may use those terms. But this is just a side note. So check this out. Component A team works supersonically fast, like a Learjet, and it delivers tons of sticky notes, tons of items that they have in the backlog. You may think, well, they're working fast, they're working efficiently, they're productive. Look at that. The velocity is super high. Then component B team is also pretty fast, and they produce you know something else. They move as fast as their race car, but not as fast as a plane, but pretty fast. So their velocity is slightly lower. And finally, component C team is a tortoise. It's a turtle, super slow, very low velocity. So my question to you, now that we have covered basic physics, right? How fast, like what's the limiting factor? What's the lowest common denominator when delivering a feature that consists of component A, B, and C? Whose velocity? Which team?
The slowest one.
The slowest one, Slava. Thank you very much. So yeah, so the component A team may collect its velocity as a metric and communicate on it, and probably get a pat on the back from their center of excellence or from the agile community of excellence department, whoever is measuring this. But it's almost useless, or at least it's misleading, because it creates an illusion that, hey, that's how fast we're going to be moving. In fact, if you are really into economics, if you pay attention to your return on investment, you should see a huge delta and a huge waste over production of the A component with respect to the overall feature, because it's component C team that is a bottleneck, and it's the component C team that needs help. So, and we should be actually very careful not to make these mistakes. And some teams still do. Some organizations still do. I don't think teams like this. I don't think developers like this, but somehow companies still do this. They compare velocities. They compare velocities of teams that have absolutely nothing to do with each other's estimation techniques. Their metrics, their metrical units are completely different. It's almost like comparing, people that use miles and people that use kilometers and people that use some old ancient scale of measurement against each other, trying to define who is quicker or who is further away from the point of origin. Without normalization of this is of course useless, and you can only normalize and be reliable if teams, for example, estimate together, if they work on this together, and not in every organizational structure this is possible. And I'm staying away from discussing any specific frameworks today, just explicitly not my choice. And of course, that's another mistake. Don't add V and V and V to derive some sort of a enterprise level metric, right? And I've seen so many companies do that, especially in the banking and pharmaceutical sector, where lately have been doing work. I see this left, right, and center. You add up, apples to orange to or to oranges to prunes, trying to derive, I don't know, tractors or cars. You can't really do that. Again, it may look very nice on paper or in some sort of a tool of record that you use, but in essence, it adds no value. Okay. So just please bear this in mind. And I'm just going to take this a little further. So I'm kind of dwelling on the dysfunctions and omissions and misappropriations of metrics, and I'm using the beat up, the good old loved by everyone metric called velocity, because an estimation, because those usually come as a horse and carriage. I will take this into better ways of doing metrics just in a little bit, but I just want to set you up for this conversation. That's why. Once again, for metrics sake, we can do some crazy stuff. And this is not even a dysfunction at the overall organization level. This could be a dysfunction at a single team level. Now, we really have lost the plot. At least so many teams out there are doing this. And they don't do this because they really want to. It's because they expected to do it. Because someone somewhere is collecting this data and is turning this data into some sort of a punishment stick, a punishment tool. So teams do that. So imagine this: if you have a team that is not full of full stack developers, or at least M-shaped, at least T-shaped developers, people that understand each other's skills, technology, and also possess primary and secondary, maybe tertiary and quaternary skill set. If we don't have this, and we have single function specialists, and they're asked to estimate, you're going to probably see this sort of a irony. This is almost like it's a fad. It's a zoo. Everyone throws out a number, and of course, there are people out there that somehow try to derive scientific math from it. Now, this is the kind of science that I do not want you to remember. Physics, math, yes. This is kludgy calculus. Please don't do that. You will probably derive a very nice metric here, 8.8 story points. But first of all, story points meant to be what? Relative, not absolute. But secondly, the way it's derived is just ridiculous. And I'm just going to pause on this slide for a minute. I do not plan on reading this verbatim line by line, but please take a minute and read. And while you finish this up, I will add something that's probably important. It is not the metrics that are futile, and this is not the metrics that are harmful. It is how they are often being requested by whom, and how they're being utilized after being collected. So of course, the evil is not in the numbering measurement scale. It's not in the numbering schema. It's in the devil is in who's using it, how they're using it, and why they're using it. Okay. So for example, a planning poker, estimation with planning poker is an amazing technique. Very simple, very lean, very light. And it's meant for something that has been done pretty effectively and well for decades. But because elsewhere somehow we took the wrong path as an industry, and we ended up turning something that was genuine and authentic into something that became completely useless. We turned this into some sort of a punishment tool for many for many teams and for organizations. So that's why it is actually harmful to use in many cases. Let me introduce and at the same time walk you through this a very light system model that is actually also focused on metrics. And again, the velocity is being used as an example of the bad metric. So velocity is actually 99.99% in my experience. When someone uses a velocity as a measurement, as a metric, it is not good. They either are adding no value or actually creating harm. So here's an example of a system. It's called system model for those of you that have studied organizational design and product centricity through large-scale Scrum. They will probably recognize the approach. So imagine this: the goal of my manager, my boss, is to see high team velocity. So what is going to lead to the goal? And by the way, my goal as a developer is to have more rewards, because I work for a large bank. Of course, we get paid, and we get paid in bonuses, and I want to have a fatter, bigger, thicker bonus. Okay. So what happens here? So my boss says, I want high feature velocity. I want high velocity. So immediately I feel in my skin, and my team members feel the same thing. Pressure to try actions for high feature velocity. We're just going to have this pressure. So this feature velocity, let's call this a system variable, now becomes a very, very poisonous venom, very poisonous thing. Here's why. Because as our feature velocity increases, as we go faster, think of a highway or freeway. The faster you drive, if you have speed bumps there, what's going to happen? you're gonna encounter more and more speed bumps. Boom, 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 as opposed to boom, boom, boom. So feature velocity will naturally give rise to the number of bugs. And that's why you see the number of defects here goes up. What happens then? You have a little O stands for opposite. It's opposite means there's a stabilizing loop. As the number of bugs grows, your feature velocity is going to grow as well. This part of the system, I'm going to just mention in passing because it takes us into a much deeper conversation. If we have a scarcity of cash supply, such as we're not allowed as an organization to purchase, to buy developers at higher price, although, we need to pay for high quality, right? C stands for constraint. Then the number of poor developers or poorly skilled developers will grow. If the number of poorly skilled developers, it will grow, the feature velocity will drop. However, if we do have a number of high developers growing up, then the feature velocity will increase. But that's just a side conversation for now. I want to go back to the velocities here. So if we measure this metric, then there will be pressure to game numbers. I can assure you that every team, every developer who is being watched and managed on what velocity they produce, they think of ways to increase velocity. And let me ask you this question. What's the best way to increase velocity? Who has an idea?
Double your estimates.
Exactly, right? Just inflate them, big deal. So that's why the degree of measurement dysfunction is gonna grow, because the pressure to game numbers will also grow. And here's why, because I wanna get my rewards. And there's another system variable here, value of rewards. If my bonus is only 5% a year, I probably won't risk kludging the numbers. But if my bonus is 25 to 30% a year, you better believe it. I'll do what it takes to produce a high velocity. And managers understand this, and managers of managers understand this, and agile coaches understand this, and coaches of coaches understand this, and managers of coaches understand this. Then of course,
There's another way to do it also to
yeah, Dave, please.
to deliver to deliver what you say you were going to deliver, but you don't properly QA it, basically.
Essentially,
So, so you basically, like, you cut corners on the unit testing, you cut corners on the regression testing.
Yep.
But you say that you tested it, so you technically delivered it, but if you have like 100 defects, does it really matter? But you delivered it.
Precisely right. I actually have a name for it. It's called the developer's magic toolbox. When you start cutting corners, spaghetti code, untested, no unit test, we actually have it well covered. You're absolutely right. It's a great way to deliver on time, probably on budget, probably on scope, in scope. But that triangle of conventional project management, and I do apologize if anyone's a PMP here, that Q that sits in the middle stands for quality. It's gonna suck. Right, something has to give, so you're right. All right, enough about this sadness. So let's see if we can turn up the dial a little bit and talk about nice stuff, or at least I don't ever want to call anything best, but maybe better. Okay, so let me ask you this question. I put this sign of not equal. Unfinished work and undone work are not the same. Maybe someone wants to guess what's what.
Unfinished work is work that had not been finished. Undone work is work that had been returned because of quality.
I will take this answer, Slava. Thank you. Although I need to disclaim that none of these are like standard, vocabulary, standard terms in Scrum or large scale Scrum, or so it's more of an intuition. So another guess maybe, and I'll help you with this. Unfinished work, consider this as a team problem. Undone work is an organizational problem. If maybe this helps a little. Take another guess.
Not fit for quality.
I'm sorry, Sammy, what
Not,
is it?
Not fit for quality or not fit for purpose.
Not fits the purpose. Okay, so I'll take this answer because clearly it's a bit of a trappy question. It's a bit of a it's not a straightforward question. But let me give you a slightly different perspective, and maybe it will resonate. So this is the reason why I give you these two disclaimers: team problem and or issue and organizational issue. Let's just say me, Sasha, Taslim, and Chris, and Peter, and Dave, and a bunch of you guys. We are in the same team, and we planned our sprint, and we we're slightly aggressive when we planned. We forgot that Chris will be on maybe on vacation. Someone may potentially just pick a unexpected PTO, and someone may get sick. Just we also did not do a good job identifying all of the potential risks and challenges with work that we had on hand. So we planned a bunch of things, a bunch of PBIs in a sprint, and comes the end of the sprint, we finished maybe only 75 to 80% of it. So we had a bunch of unfinished work. Now we could have finished it. We could have done it. We just miscalculated our capabilities. So we bit more than we could swallow. On a good day, on a good sprint, it would be an easy walk in the park, but we flunked it. Now, what do we need to do? We need to retrospect. We need to understand what happened, why we did this, what pushed us into over planning, over forecasting, and maybe we should do a course correction comes the next sprint. Not a big deal, right? That's unfinished work, something we could have finished, but we did not. The term I use and many other folks use, but informal, especially in large scale Scrum, if you read books and if you actually study deep, you will see this term a lot. Undone work is work that we never planned on doing. And we never planned on doing this not because we were lazy or we did not have enough time or someone fell ill or took an unexpected PTO. Not because of that. But why? Excuse me. Why? It says an organizational issue, so why? It's an organizational problem. Why? Well, because we're not supposed to do it. It's not our job to do it. It's another team that does it. We don't do deployments. We have a deployment team that does it. We have some DevOps teams, DevOps department that handles a bunch of post-development efforts. Oh, we don't test. We have a testing team. So there are things that we would never be able to do in the first place. Integration, not us. Deployment, not us. Full end-to-end testing, not us. Documentation, not us. So you can't really call this unfinished work. In fact, in your beloved tools, whatever you use, whether it's Jira, Rally, version 1 of STS or Azure DevOps, it doesn't matter. You can set your work to the most mature status, such as done or done or done or done, whatever you use. However, if you cannot actually push it to prod, it's not done. And there is what's called an undone department or undone team that actually handles your done work, to be done work. So there is always a gap between you and prod. So it's not because you overslept or did not deliver or slipped in the middle of the sprint. You were never set up for success. It was never a part of your definition of done. So I'm gonna say it once again. It was never a part of your definition of done. So do not kill yourself over this. Do not try to lose your sleep over this. You were never set up to deliver all the way throughout. So your doneness was initially defined as incomplete, as in immature. So,
But your estimates should cover end to end, right? So whatever it's going to be, if you're relying on another team, your estimate should cover that. Another issue there could be is you have 10 developers. How many people have seen this? You have 10 developers and you have one and maybe if you're lucky, 2 internal testers, and the developers wait till the last minute. So your sprint is supposed to end on a Friday, and they hand all the work to the testers internally on the team on Thursday. So they have one day to do their exploratory testing, DevOps, everything. And of course it doesn't get done. So, but all of this is supposed to be calculated in when you do your estimates at sprint planning.
But so Dave, yes, so I agree with you in essence. So so you just raising a much, not a bigger, but slightly a separate issue, which probably requires and deserves a discussion in its own. If you have these micro handoffs inside your sprint, and they're all tail ended towards the end of the sprint in big batches, everything being thrown on the lap of a single or just a few developers. We can actually explore this in depth, and we actually do this when we study large scale Scrum. This is called local optimization by a single function specialty, and it's a micro, medium waterfall within Scrum. That's a problem on its own. But as far as estimations go, so I don't see, again, one of the reasons why those numbers, why those metrics are almost useless is because when one team is asked to estimate something where work involves another team's effort, where you have no visibility, control, or right to say what they can or cannot do, that becomes just a silly exercise. So for all intents and purposes, if my team Zulu is able to do from soup to nuts, and when I say soup to nuts, I mean from start to finish of what we consider as doable, that's the scope of our estimation. I mean, I don't see any reason why we would be including anything that is outside of our team's effort and capabilities. And
Well,
actually,
if you're talking about something external to the team, and I'm not talking about 30
Mm.
years ago, I'm talking about Scrum, or more so safe, or less. I guess what I would
yeah,
say is, where I've seen external type dependencies, we're talking about PI planning. So you have a roadmap, and anything external, they have to commit to having that done based on the roadmap. So it's pretty easy to say, hey, listen, don't blame my team because they didn't get their stuff accordingly done by what they had promised on the roadmap. Now, that's been my experience in terms of
yeah,
when you're talking about the
yeah,
external team.
yeah,
But the issue I was bringing up was you have like maybe one, maybe two internal testers on
right.
your team. Now, I have seen that work really well instead of like what you were talking about, a micro handoff.
Yeah.
I've seen like developers and testers work hand in hand. So the developer will get maybe not even the whole thing done, maybe part of it, hand it off to the tester and say, listen, I want you to test this, I want you to test this, and I want you to test this. They go off and do that, and
Yeah.
then the developer goes and works on something else in parallel.
Yeah.
That's the best way to do it. So it's not really a handoff, you're integrated.
Yeah, so I suggest, so thank you for this, Dave. By the way, when you say safe all last, I would try to decouple this conversation as much as I can from commercial frameworks, especially if we come from the background of safe and PMO. We will naturally have to talk about external dependencies and handoffs and other teams, not something that I'm experienced with. So I'm not qualified to talk about it. But we can separate this conversation into maybe another one and have this discussion. Just to go back and stay on the subject here. When we say undone work, we explicitly mean work that cannot be done by our team by organizational design and sphere of influence and control. That's what's undone. As opposed to, and maybe the next slide will help a little bit on the same. When we say unfinished, essentially, let me even simplify this further. Maybe after this slide, I will try to simplify this. As this slide also alludes to the same acronyms, the same abbreviation. So if you look at these green concentric circles, as time progresses from left to right, the gradual maturity of definition of done, you are encapsulating more and more type of work as a part of your team, as something that your team can do. And as you do so, your undone work gradually shrinks. Now, it may never get to zero, it may never get to null, but that's the that's the aspiration. That's what it should be. And by the way, in Scrum or in large scale Scrum, there is no such thing as an other team. It is the team, because there is, of course, if we talk about product teams, if we talk about single function specialty or component teams or application teams, then you're going to have those other teams and more teams and some external dependencies, and we'll probably digress into external dependency management, and we're going to need more dependency managers. So that's not the direction we're going into. So, but this is just to emphasize the importance of the gradual maturity of your metric. I'm sorry, of your definition of done. And now I'm going to make an overarching blanket statement. The way you expand your maturity, the way you expand your definition of done is a pretty good indicator how you're maturing as an organization. So if you are still at the level of, arbitrarily speaking, of unit testing or UAT only, and leaving so much else, everything that's in red is someone else. It's yet another team. Then you can consider your definition of done as being not very mature. So your metric of measurement maturity is right in front of you, in front of us, right? We want to measure us our ability to deliver on demand with a click of a button and deliver value to a customer. And this is the best, if not the best, one of the best ways to measure our maturity. So if I wanted to measure anything, I would like to measure our ability, my ability to deliver without any dependencies, without any holdups, without any delays and obstacles. Okay. And this is just to give you an example of some of the things that may be a part of your definition of done. And each one of these, like even take testing. Imagine everything that ends with an ility, stability, usability, stress monkey. Imagine this is all excluded from your definition of done today on the testing side. Fine, okay. So you can start with something like this. You can start with a very small, very low radius, small radius concentric circle, the green one here on the screen. But as time goes by, as time progresses, you would like to increase your you would like to expand your definition of done and add more and more and more. Okay. I'm just gonna throw out a couple more examples of more meaningful, not the best, but more meaningful numerical units or metrics that you can actually use. Certainly better than velocities. Certainly better than some other vanity metrics we know. So for example, if you look at Sonar Cube, right, some of these could be a pretty good metrics now. Number of issues you discover, the problems, right? Overall technical debt. Lines of code is actually interesting. Do you want to have more or less lines of code? There's no.
It seems like extraneous information completely.
The what?
It seems like completely extraneous information.
I'm sorry, external, you say?
Extraneous, useless.
Okay, well, so technical debt is so in other words, you can measure these things, right? And you can
Right, but
measure.
how can you measure technical debt?
How can you what? How can you measure what?
How can you measure technical debt?
I think I caught it, but if Sasha helped me out, I'm a little bit off on.
How would you be able to measure technical debt?
So you can. I don't want to hang on this one specifically, but you can measure technical. So technical debt could be a composite number. It could be number of bugs, could be a number of broken issues. Technical debt is actually cumulatively is a part of your organizational debt. So technical debt could be, it's not just the bugs, but I think the gentleman Slava mentioned the lines of code, and that's the example of the number that could be actually not definitive, but if you can say we have delivered the same number of features with fewer lines of code, that's actually good, right? The high number does not, in this case, high number does not mean better. All I'm suggesting is that this is the tool that actually measures technical excellence, just like, you know, some other tools we have, Cucumber, Sonar Cube. These are the actual mechanics to capture numbers, numerical values that could be analyzed, assessed, and improved upon.
Have you ever seen code written that's so minimal that you can't even read it? It's completely unreadable, unmaintainable, unless you were the person that actually wrote it. Cause
Yeah,
I
I
have.
mean, I'm sure so this is another good example. A quality code is the code that can be easily read by a non-writer, right? In fact, I recommend reading Clean Coders by Bob Martin. It's a very good series. He actually talks about this. If your code is almost without comments or no comments at all, and so clean that anyone else can read it, that's a very good indicator of quality. But so these are just some examples. Before I go to definition of ready, which could be another, you know, it's almost in the opposite direction. I want to stay on the definition of done just for a little longer, and I want to make sure I drive this point across. At least that was my intended point. Once again, doneness or definition of done is our ability, is something that defines our internal team agreement. That when we say we have reached our definition of done, we essentially can, I guess, pat each other in the back and say we're done with our sprint, we're done with our delivery. Now, what's included in our doneness is a completely different thing. It's a completely different topic. The more we include in it, the more mature we are as a team. The more we exclude from it, the less we are mature as a team. For example, on average, almost 9 out of 10 times. Chitan, I got your hand just 1 second. Thank you for raising it, by the way. On average, a feature team or a product team will always have their definition of done that is much higher in maturity than a component team. And that should be common sense. That should be obvious because a component team cannot really do anything on their own unless they integrate it with another team. Most likely, it will require some external support, external help. Maybe you need an integration manager or dedicated integration team that integrates deliveries by different component teams. So if you look at the definition of done of each of the component teams, on average, it will be less mature, more naive, more simple, less inclusive. So the word inclusiveness here, I'm going to use specifically to say, if you don't include enough in your definition of done, it will be most likely immature. And the opposite is true too. Chitan, please.
Yeah, thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I hope you can hear me clearly. I have a two-part question. In your slide, it says like if you have a 5-sprint goal for definition of done, at that time you do the UAT, and if it is the end of the goal, you do performance. So does that mean even if it is a 2-sprint shippable potential product, you don't do UAT testing or performance particular testing?
I'm sorry, I think I understood the question. If I got it wrong, please correct me. This is an arbitrary figure, so this is just an approximation. What it really means is that, hypothetically speaking, in 5 sprints, let's say in the current definition of done today, as we are at the moment in the sprint, we can only include unit testing. UAT is not something we do. We just don't have the bandwidth. We can't. Maybe don't have the skill. In 5 sprints, we have evolved, we have matured, we have improved our own definition of done, and now UAT is being included in it. And in a year, again, it's an arbitrary figure, it's a hypothetical number. Performance testing also has been included. And then maybe in 2 years, you're able to go to production. And maybe somewhere along the lines, you can also include end user documentation. You name it. Does this explain checking this? So this is just a way to
Yes, yeah.
illustrate how you add more to your definition of done as time goes by.
Got it.
Okay.
But yeah, but my second part of the question was like, suppose if you feel in the first sprint there are a lot of user exception testing related kind of bugs, like for example, it is not customer centric or the performance is slow, like the
Mhm.
API request response we have anticipated should be less than, for example, 5 seconds and it is taking 10 seconds. So still do you m- mean to say that even in a 2 week sprint, we can't do performance testing or a UAT testing
Well, the
if it is
goal
not
is,
shippable product?
well, so you want to include these. So you potentially, let me rephrase this. On day one or in the first sprint, you want to include everything. Theoretically, practically, this is probably not doable. So this is just a way to illustrate that not everything is included in your definition of done with in the current state of your doneness. You want to have this aspiration, and as you progress from left to right over time, you want to include it. So maybe I'm not 100% clear on the question you're asking, but you do want to have all of these included in your definition of done. And your definition of done applies to the whole team, or if you work as multiple teams on the same product, as in large scale Scrum, for example, although I said I won't
If
be
I
mentioning.
just refresh it, like if you find the unit testing was good in initial of the sprint, but the performance was not that very good as per the customer requirements, still do you ship the product after 2 weeks, or you keep it and just like don't ship it to the customer?
Well, so first of
Because
all,
you are telling my
Mhm.
team is not well mature and we are going to take time of 5 to 6 sprints to get the performance testing done.
So again, please understand that performance testing should not be in a year. It should be today, now. So I am just trying to illustrate that majority of teams, or many teams, I should say, do not have this included in their definition of done. So today, if you're in sprint, like I'm not sure what sprint you're in, like sprint 100, today, your performance testing should be a part of your sprint. Okay. But if the answer is no, it's not the case, then I'm inviting you to rethink this and try to absorb it into your definition as sprints go by.
Okay,
So
thank you so much for your this
you
explanation.
you have to think of these unit testing, UAT, everything has to be done today. So you finish in Scrum at least, right? We're not talking about waterfall phase gated approaches, or organizations that use very cumbersome large frameworks that have many component teams, where everyone does their own little thing. No. And I know there are terms that float around. We plan for a release, we're planning for an increment. At least in Scrum and large scale Scrum, if you really deliver piecemeal, it's today. You click a button, you release it to production, you deploy on demand. So all of these should be a part of your sprint today. Unfortunately, if they are not, your aspiration, your hope, your goal should be to include them over time by expanding your definition of done, and by doing so naturally shrinking undoneness. Going back to this simple illustration that undone is whatever is left, but it's not because you can't, it's because of your organizational structure does not allow you. By the way, maybe I should have said this, a lot of it, and maybe this is an on point, it's a very key statement. A lot of it is not because you cannot do it. A lot of it is because your organization is equipped that way. It's wired that way. Your team is not allowed to do a UAT. Your team is not allowed to do performance. Your team is not allowed to deploy to production. Your team is not allowed to integrate. It's by org design and the sphere of influence and control. And that's, of course, the maturity, that the organizational maturity, right?
Thank you, Jen, for your time. Yeah.
Sure, my pleasure. So let me spend a little bit of time definition already. So we talked about expanding and including more and more. Think of it this way: the more you include in the definition of done, presumably it's not nonsense, it's useful stuff, the more you include, the better. So your definition of done as it expands, it becomes naturally more mature. Think of your definition of ready almost as an opposite animal, as an opposite, maturity in the opposite direction. Here's why. So first of all, what's the definition of ready? It's your state of readiness. We're ready to start a sprint. We are ready to take this volume of work and turn it into sprint scope. And we're comfortable with it, and we are in agreement with our users, if it's an internal product development, or customers, if this is an external product development. This is our phase control before something gets into a sprint, okay? Everything required to start your development. So today, your definition ready is probably not mature. And so read these bullets at your pace, and I'm going to paraphrase them just a little bit here and there, because I actually find this pretty funny. So, and I've seen this, I see this almost every other day, which you see teams putting in a definition of ready makes my eyes, teary. It makes my eyes watery. It feels like they are signing off on their life, on their destiny. It feels like they are putting so much contractual relationship into this definition that if it was any less, it would put everyone at risk, everyone's life at risk. So this is an example, and of course, I encourage you to shrink it as soon as you can, to simplify it as soon as you can. This is an example of, and again, not precise, but very similar to something like this. It's an example of a very immature definition of ready. Now, in 3 months, you may have something like this. Overly, lots of stress on breaking down into technical tasks, almost intoxication with story points. Remember we talked about this at the beginning. You have so much emphasis on numbers and metrics and estimations and stuff that is almost, trivial. Probably not as bad as on day one, but also pretty heavy. And a lot of this is,
to me, definition of ready is more so, it's not so much a developer or an engineering thing. It's a, first of all, I don't find people take definition of seriously. I'm not exactly sure why, but they seem to be lazy about DOR. But to me, the DOR is all about the requirements or the user stories being very well thought out, such that the developers can take it and run with it. Of course, you're always going to need refinement, but it shouldn't be major refinements. And as far as the developer side of it, I don't really believe that the developer should need any of this stuff, which, like, I don't know, breaking things into tasks, design and architecture,
so
I mean,
Dave,
unless
I'm
it's
sorry, I'm gonna respectfully interrupt you. So what you're saying, and do me a favor, just for future comment, just raise your hand so that interrupt me halfway. I'm gonna have
Sure.
I'll happily take your comment. If
Sure.
you read this graphic, and that's why I'm trying to paraphrase it. If you read it correctly, I'm trying to get a laugh out of it, but by doing so also allude to the fact that you can improve on this clearly. The day one, the DOR today, and even in 3 months, it's an example of immature definition already. Okay, it's still very immature, because you shouldn't be focusing on this stuff to the extent that it prevents someone from planning and starting a sprint. So definition already, just so we actually don't stress it in Scrum. We don't stress it in large scale Scrum because it assumes organizational structure that is not contractual. In other words, there were no internal contracts, us versus them, between developers and users. What you see on day one is actually horrible. What you see in 3 months is also pretty bad. So this is not a recommendation. This is this is an acknowledgement that this still requires lots of improvement. And we oftentimes call it a CYA, covering your behind, because we try to capture everything in the sun. I'm sorry.
In respect to other people's time and in respect to our guest, if you have a question, please raise your hand.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
monitoring the hands, and if you want to say something, please raise your hand, and I will you'll be having a chance to speak. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, sure. No problem. Yeah, well, I think it's addressed to the crowd. Thank you. So far, good questions. So let me move on with this one, and maybe then we'll open for Q&A, and I will invite everyone to contribute. So hypothetically speaking, of course, this is not a prescription. This is not a script. This is almost an irony, right? So far, I'm still ironic. As your definition already hopefully matures, it gets simplified. You can even see by the number of bullets, right? It goes from 6 to 5 to 4. We still keep measuring everything that we can get a hold of, capacities, velocities. We see a bunch of stuff that is, again, it's an indicator of poor agility in the first place, like tech for tech spikes, stuff that is really not customer centric. It's probably not as bad as day 1 or 3 months into it, but it's still not so good. This final, I'm going to give you not the best, but at least a better way to frame, to present your definition already and live by. So almost only 3 bullets again. Just the way of visualizing how this could be simplified from 6 to 5 to 4 to 3. So if I am on the team, and if I feel that a PBI, product backlog item, presents business value that is well understood by me and my team members, and each PBI collectively adds up to the potentially shippable product increment at the end of the sprint. And of course, everything is sliced properly vertically so that you can essentially deliver a slight piece of functionality with every sprint. I should be relatively comfortable. I should be happy. So if this is my definition ready today, or I'm sorry, in a year, then I can probably rightfully claim that it's in a much better state. It's much more mature. It's much more. Sundar, did you want to say something? All right, you probably want to mute yourself, Sundar. So your definition ready at the end of the sprint. I'm sorry, at the end of the journey, at the end of the year cycle, is probably much more mature than it was on day 1. So another way to look at this is that as you progress over time, your definition of ready should not mention things that are obvious, that are common sense. There are indicators of lack of trust. There are indicators of poor relationships. There are indicators of fear. There are indicators of CYA, and there are indicators of things that are either useless or actually harmful. And so in other words, the simpler it is, the more common sense it is, the better. And that's why when we talk about definition of ready, we over time want to see this being simplified or shrunk. And maybe so over time, right? As we progress over time, gradual maturity goes from left to right. And this is why if you wanted to think of your definition of ready and definition of done, you will see them almost moving in opposite directions. Simplicity of definition ready, or shrinkage of it, and inclusiveness or expansion of definition of done, which does not mean you have to write every single thing on a piece of paper or put in a tool, because you need to capture this in the document. Maybe you should do that, but don't make this into some sort of a religious effort. It has to be in action. It has to be in your built in your team's capability. But definition ready, the simpler it is, the more lean it is, the more mature it is. And the opposite is true about the definition of done. The more inclusive it is, the more comprehensive it is, the more mature it is. And these are the signs of various types of maturities. Organizational maturity, especially when we talked about definition of ready. I'm sorry, definition of done. Remember, we talked about stuff that sits outside of a definition of done and it's handled by other teams and departments is an indicator of organizational complexity and therefore immaturity. Organizational structure is the first order factor here. Culture, lack of trust, for example. Communication also. If you have too many handoffs, one team finishes one thing, then another team hands over, it gets hand over to another team, and on and on and on. Your communication will be just more complex. And of course, technical maturity, right? Teams that are not able to finish work to its completion in a sprint can probably also suspect that their technical maturity is not up to par. So I'm gonna pause now because the rest would be just an open forum or Q&A. Let me know if you have any questions, and meanwhile I can probably take a look at the chat. Chetan, go ahead. It's best if you just ask.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, like, basically, when you refer a Scrum guide, they say that definition of ready is not officially part of the Scrum. It is just a complementary practice. So why do we discuss this thing in the webinars and seminars? Because the reason I'm telling you, I'm an IT consultant and I work for different company every 6 months and 1 year. In some company as a consultant, when I say, okay, let's talk about definition of particular this ready, they say no, it's not part of the Scrum, and we should directly go into something else. And sometimes some people are willing to listen about definition of particular ready.
So I see what you're saying. Yeah. So first of all, and I'm sure, and I want to be respectful to whoever your colleagues and partners are, but I wouldn't be surprised if they actually did not study Scrum well. Maybe just read the guide without actually understanding where it came from, did not understand its history, its origins, and its purpose. The Scrum guide is not meant to be prescriptive. That's why it's called a guide. It's a set of guidelines, right? It's not meant to be overly prescriptive, and this is precisely how. This is not an execution script. First of all, if you don't do certain things in the guide, it does not mean you go to jail. As a matter of fact, it just means you're probably doing something else other than Scrum. Could be also effective, more or less, but may not be necessarily Scrum. But more importantly is this. Scrum is an empirical process control. It's meant to be incomplete by design, so that you can essentially add to it as needed organizationally, or which I should say each team should be looking at this individually. If you are doing one team, what's called BS, basic Scrum, in small times product development, in large product development, large scale product development, like large scale Scrum, you would have to look at your practices and guides together as the whole product group, so multiple teams. But to answer your question, Chetan, definition ready and done are not explicitly discussed there, because explicitly there was a statement, or there are multiple references to, you have to expand, you have to use it as a guide and build upon it, and that's what good teams do. It just so happens this happens to be a good practice. Good practice to have it. If you don't have it explicitly written on a piece of paper or on a wiki, that's fine too. Maybe because your team, the way it's structured, the way it works, it does it implicitly. It's implied for them. For some teams, you actually need to go an extra step and make it as an explicit agreement, but for both ready and done. But these are certainly not legal documents that you must have for some sort of like a CMMI, successful completion or something. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Sure. See that quite a few comments in the chat, but I'm gonna open it, but I'm not sure how many of those are just comments, or maybe some of them are questions.
There is one comment that I think deserves some attention.
Please.
There was a comment that as a developer, I would expect somebody to write the use cases for me so that I would be focused on coding. that certainly draw
Okay.
my attention. So
Okay, I think
I'm,
it's coming
I'm
from
sure you
Dave.
are ready
Sure.
to
Sure.
challenge that.
Sure. I don't have lots of cartoons and graphics or funny videos that actually I would typically use to discuss this matter, but I'll try to paraphrase it. Well, first of all, who would be responsible for writing use cases, or who would be responsible to? Yeah, let's talk about use cases or user stories. Who writes them? Dave,
Product
since
owner.
product
Well,
owner writes them.
actually, technically in Scrum, anybody can write them, but the
Correct.
product owner is the belly button that's responsible for it. Now, I can tell you, just like I wrote in the comments, that
Mhm.
I spent an incredible waste of time going to my systems engineers, or as we call them today, product owners, and where they were either unclear or unthought out or not written well, I would have to constantly go to them and say, listen, I don't understand this. What are you doing with this? Because
Mhm.
I can't write code if I don't understand what your requirements say. I cannot write code if there are no requirements that are addressing certain things. If you don't write the negative cases in there, I can't write the code for that. So what do I do with my else if statements? What do I do
Mhm.
for my else statements? If you don't put that in there, I'm not going to cover that. So you may have exceptions. You may have things like divide by zero. You could have all kinds of things that can crash your software. Or do
Mhm.
you have exception handling? Did you write requirements to deal with the exception handling? I could
So
go on
yeah.
and on. I have
So Dave,
decades of experience writing
sure.
code, and it frustrates me when I see garbage requirements.
Sure. So first of all, I think partially my answer will be in your question. So when you say you went to, and I forget what what title they have today, they used to have, now they are product owners. I'm going to respectfully decline the claim that they are product owners today. They're most likely same very people that it used to be, deputized on paper into product owners, but they do not own a product. They are most likely what we call them TOOs, team output owners, XBAs, ex-technical writers. They are not business people. They're not properly positioned organizationally to set the tone on strategy, mission, vision, and budgeting. Those are the POs. Those are the
Well,
POs.
so in Scrum, I mean, so
Mhm.
you have the three responsibilities. You have Scrum Master, you have a product owner, and you have the development team.
I'll
Now,
take that. Sure.
if you suck in waterfall, you would have what are either called, depending on the domain, systems engineers, which is
Not in
usually
Scrum.
more
Okay.
usually more scientific domains. And on
Okay.
the if you're talking about like banks or businesses, it would be called business analysts. Same
Right.
exact thing, two different domains. Business analysts, but they would write in waterfall the shall statements, which were your
So
requirements.
Dave, I want to
Now,
stay and focus on your question, and I apologize for interrupting. I want to answer the way you frame this. So if you just want to focus on code, you are a coder. You're not a product developer. A product developer would actually go out and not necessarily with the product owner, because a product owner, especially in large scale Scrum, it's a highly elevated position of a strategist. You will sit down and talk to users and customers, and you will be doing this alongside maybe with an expert in writing, but who will be also a developer. But that would
well, I
be
mean,
actually
large scale Scrum is exactly what it is. It's built on Scrum, and Scrum is defined as product owner, Scrum Master, and developer. There's the
let's not. Yeah.
three
Okay.
responsibilities.
Well, we're not. This is not a large scale Scrum shop discussion right now. I mean, of course, you can hold me accountable for this, but not today. But I guess my point is this: I wrote you. I'm reading your statement. If not laid out, I will not be able to code. So clearly, you need to, as a developer, you need to write a program. You need to write software. However, um, what I guess what gets my attention here is that, and by the way, so when you say a lead developer, as opposed to what other type of developer may exist.
Well, usually most development teams will have a lead developer, which may
Not in
be
Scrum, not in Scrum or large scale Scrum, but
no,
yes.
well,
It's all,
I
everyone is a
understand that, but
developer, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
talking about practically. I mean, every Scrum team that I've ever been involved with,
Mm.
there was always a lead developer. They were usually also the architect.
Okay, so every developer should have architectural skills. Again, that's why we talk about full stack developers, M-shaped or at least T-shaped. And I don't argue, I'm not going to deny the fact that many teams that call themselves Scrum teams have leaders and laggers and anywhere in between. I just want to make sure we understand seniority matters, but we all are developers in Scrum, and just because someone is a more senior person does not mean that he or she should not be, for example, talking to users and customers. Quite the opposite. They could be a good role model for others to have those conversations. I would like to answer your question collectively. You have a few, pieces to it as following. The responsibility of writing use cases or defining cases. By the way, large cases could be easily split into smaller chunks called stories, PBIs. Again, a complex case, it's a great candidate to be split. Those are the responsibilities of an entire team working side by side, hand to hand with users and customers. I would certainly not recommend delegating this responsibility to a single throat to choke. I would certainly not expect a product owner to be the only person that does it. In Scrum, we sometimes get away with just with a wrist slap by dragging a PO into lots of rudimentary, nitty-gritty daily activities. Just because the product is small, the backlog is relatively small, and the set of responsibilities is relatively limited. In a larger product development situation, when you have like large scale Scrum, although I try to steer away from it, physically, mentally, a product owner will not be able to embrace as much. That's why we delegate as much as we can to users and customers to be engaged directly with developers. Now, no managers, no analysts, no architects, no special individuals. Developers talk directly to customers.
Well,
So,
I can tell you that I don't believe that is the
That's
way
fine.
Scrum is designed, right? So the Scrum Master is supposed to shield the team from outside influences. That's one of the first things I mean, you can read it in the Scrum Guide if you want, but
Dave,
and
let's pause on this
and
one. I'm actually very well informed, and I would say I'm pretty well informed, and have some background in Scrum, and I can tell you, you're absolutely right. Shielding is one of the things that a Scrum Master should do. And the most important shield that a Scrum Master must produce is shielding from managers. But it's not the same as preventing direct communication and information flow between users and customers on one end and developers on the other.
so one of the
these are not the
issues
same.
with that you'll see is that you'll have the customers constantly, I've actually seen this, you'll have the customers constantly in there bothering the developers and keeping them from getting their work done, which is why the Scrum Master is supposed to shield them. And one of the advantages of having the customer go through the product owner is you can actually cause confusion because the product owner is responsible for the vision. And so if they're working around the product owner directly with the developers could be out there doing something completely different than what
Dave,
the
you're
product.
describing organizational malfunction that needs to be recognized upfront and fixed and remediated. So you're sharing with us typical malfunctions, typical organizational dysfunctions. And my recommendation to you is to call it out earlier on, and by org design and education to senior executives, prevent it. And if you don't have people on the ground to do it, of course you may run into these problems.
Jen, let me help you with this, because I think I observed a couple of misconceptions from Dave. First of all, we as a team, it doesn't matter, product owner, developer, Scrum Master, we share the same goal. We want to deliver customer value. and we co-own the product together. Instead of pointing fingers, oh, it's him or that's him, we all take accountability and step up. And second, it is a common problem that the way how we write product backlog items, the way how we write sprint goals, this is a solution to build. Instead, it has to be a problem to solve. Okay, team, here is a problem to solve. Go ahead and do it in your own discretion. We have a chance to review what you built. If, as a product owner, I find that it's not exactly what I wanted, we could have a new item in a product backlog for the next sprint. Solution to instead of solution to build, a problem to solve. I hope it will help David out of his misconception. In the meanwhile, I want to be sure that everybody else have a chance to ask questions.
Let's take another few. I was looping through my funny graphics, and I was actually trying to give more more funny content, and maybe to Dave's point, let's move on, of course. But if you can read this silly sequel, right? So the last update statement actually talks about turning overnight your X used to be roles into product owners. Of course, if you deal with these sort of people that are really not product owners, certainly not as per Scrum, then you may end up relying on them for doing lots of scribing, lots of writing, lots of we call it administrative massaging, but really not leading, not guiding on a true product, right? And another
that's kind of a glorified version of the business analyst.
Yeah, well,
it's not a product.
That's right there. That's a blind date right here. You have a BA in the mask of a PO, and the project manager. So of course the team will suffer from that. Okay. Wish to take maybe another person or two. I'm not sure where we time boxed. Go on and ask if you have any questions.
Sorry, I have,
Chetan, go ahead. Yeah, just say.
I have not raised my hand this time. I just wanted to know, like, according to this slide, like you have provided project manager and business analyst. So are they part of the team? Because I have seen, I used to be business analyst few years back, and they used to tell me to write a code, or they used to tell me to create an enterprise level of architecture diagram, and for the project manager, do they really calculate the cost and this everything? That is part B of my question. Do they really calculate the cost, or the sprint delivers the value, so the sponsors do not mind paying for the cost?
So the short answer is, first of all, I'm a funny guy, and I like cartoons, and I like I like sometimes even cynical cartoons and sarcasm. So this is, of course, it's a cartoon. No, this relabeling, just like this sequel, funny sequel, isn't the way to go. Just because someone calls themselves overnight a product owner does not make them into a product owner. Just because someone puts on a mask of a Scrum Master or a coach overnight does not make them into a coach or a Scrum Master, especially if they come from a very historical and very orthodox micromanagement, command and control micromanagement thinking. So I wouldn't be considering this as the guide how to run it. It's actually a cartoon. That's how you should not be doing it. Okay. Now, one thing to take away also, and I don't want to dismiss and disqualify, or just because someone was a business analyst, they should never ever become for a job as a product owner. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting, however, is that if someone wants to become a product owner or has an aspiration, they will have to be on the business side. They would have to be with the business. They have to be properly positioned organizational. It's not a relabeling of old into new. It's not just a promotion with a increased compensation. It's your responsibility day to day for the whole towards the whole product. It's the responsibility of yours towards your internal users or external clients that makes you a great candidate to become a product owner. So if you, as a part of your learning journey and as a part of your career path, get into business and get to a point where you are given responsibility to manage a product facing outward, your users and customers, then maybe you will become a great candidate to play the role of a product owner facing the teams. Okay.
But do we require a project manager role? Like generally they say they calculate the
There are
cost and the
no
scope and
there are
everything.
no managers. So there are no managers in Scrum. If one team Scrum is silent about it, of course, there are no managers on the team. There will be probably organizational managers around the team because in Scrum, and also the Scrum Guide is completely silent about organizational structure and multi-team Scrum developer. That's why we talk about large-scale Scrum in terms of organizational settings. So the answer is no, you don't need a manager. It's about self-management. It's about autonomy, sovereignty, and purpose, and ability to self-manage and self-organize and self-coordinate.
Then
So there are no
who calculates the cost of the sprint? Like will it be 5 sprint? Will it be 25 sprint?
It's a
Because
very
this
good question. It's a very good question. The responsibility of budget is the product owner. He owns the product. And by the way, the role of a product owner may be also equated to an organizational role that is, for example, head of business operations or head of line of business of some sort, like head of secure trading desk or trading municipal bond desk or head of product development. So your traditional job may either qualify you or disqualify you for the role. But as far as the traditional manager role, like a people's manager or a task manager, this gets completely absorbed and distributed within the team. In large scale Scrum, and I just have to mention because it seems like so many people gravitate towards this thinking, because it tends to be a larger organizational structure that's involved. You may have managers, although they're not mandatory, they are optional. Those are not your typical first, second line managers. Those are true enablers, capability builders, senior executive level people that can actually remove organizational impediments and really, really make the difference. They're not the ones that reassign tasks back to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That is the
Okay.
power of volunteering versus being voluntold. If you have a manager who assigns work for you, you are voluntold. It's not yours there. But if you volunteer to do the work, if you decide how to do it yourself, that's the whole power of Scrum. That's the whole power of Scrum team as a fundamental unit of Scrum.
May I also suggest something else, folks? And I think the Scrum Guide has been mentioned and kicked around as a term a few times here. That's all fair. The 2020 guide, the latest guide, is out there, and you can obviously download it elsewhere and take a look. I would also invite you to take a look. And by the way, Sasha, through you, I'm happy to share slides. There was a question about slides and some of this content. So I'm not going to do this now, but it's there. There's a Scrum Guide less version which has some specific clarifications to what actually in the Scrum Guide is not effectively described in the 2020 guide. Actually, there was some degree of digression and some degree of misunderstanding that has been introduced in the Scrum Guide. It probably makes no difference when you operate on a single team or try to apply Scrum to so-called Scrum aka component team, but it makes a lot of difference when you actually try to apply Scrum at scale for large products such as large scale Scrum, and therefore there are some corrections there. So I invite you to actually take a closer look to pay attention to this version, and it heavily rests. It takes as a fundamentals like 99.9% of the Scrum Guide by Ken Schwaber, However, and Jeff Sutherland, the co-signer, the co-creator, but it actually will help you understand what it means to apply Scrum in large scale product development in complex organizational settings. I think at this point, yeah, thank you for the comments. Thank you for the notes. Sasha, you are in charge of the show. Tell me if this is the time to wrap this up. I'll make sure everything is shared with the crowd. And of course, if anyone is interested in learning this more and in depth, please let me know. By the way, we talk about definition of ready and definition of done explicitly today, but in large scale Scrum, we actually don't even talk about definition ready as much because by organizational design, some of this is solved. And the definition of done is actually shared by multiple teams. So that also requires some degree of maturity. And we talk about some other maturity metrics very much in passing, such as transactional costs and holding costs reaching zero, hopefully at some point. But it's a slightly different level of conversation we need to have.
Thank you, Jen. I believe we were able to answer maybe not all, but the majority of the questions.
Let's take a look at another one, maybe from other folks. I have a few extra minutes. I know we.
Okay. Yeah, if you have more time.
Let's see. What
by
else?
all means.
Yeah. One from Jay. As a developer, I want our definition ready to be just, here's an idea we'd like to explore and would like to, yeah. So Jay, there's no different from what I would love to see, right? Is Jay still on the call with us? The simpler, the better. When you see a definition already turning into Encyclopedia Britannica or something that's as convoluted as the legal contract, it's it's telling. It's scary. It means that there is no trust and there is a low level of there's a low level of maturity overall organization. Us versus them is a lot. What else is there? Also from Jay there, I noticed our definition of done has two kinds of things. If we don't do this, the work is more likely to come back later and interrupt. If we don't do this, future work will be more difficult. Yeah, probably true on both ends, on both accounts. Again, definition of done, its weakness could be either because you don't have the skills yet as a team. And if so, you have to work on building those skills. Nothing prevents you, nothing says no, you shouldn't, but you just don't have it yet. And that's why we encourage full stack developers. And that's why we encourage cross training. That's why we encourage developers teaching others and learning from others. Of course, there's an HR element to it. Again, it's completely separate discussion, like a much deeper dive we need to do into career path, HR norms and policies, what drives people to learn and teach others. But that's about our internal capabilities as a team. But there are certain things that are clearly, with all the aspirations and desire that we may have as a team, we can do just because of organizational limitations. Those are organizational design problems. Because there are some managers there, they just don't feel they want to give up the control. There's some managers there that feel that this is my team, this is my domain, this is my jurisdiction. If I allow you to do integration, you're gonna F up. Of course, it's not because people are not capable. It's because there is a high chance that this person wants to hold on to his team or her team and the power they have. And this is, of course, organizational design problem. Okay, I don't have much to say because this is, I know it's the late hour my time, to be honest, but I'm happy to, we can, if there's any, if there are any other topics, there's a gamut of discussions we may have, more organizational, more systemic stuff. I'm happy to entertain it. And also, if you have any questions, just reach out, and you should be able to, reach out to me at any one of those locations, or just Google me. thank you for the time. Sasha, I'll give it back to you for now. You're mute.
Okay, let me stop the recording.
And I think mine will also stop,
Okay,
right?
stop the recording now. Recording. Just a second. Okay. In the meanwhile, I certainly would like to thank